The story that's got the country aghast this week is the incredible tale of the woman who stole an average of R1 a second from her employer over more than a decade, a total of 537 million rand from a multinational business called Medtronic between the years of 2004 and 2016. Former Boksburg accountant Hildegard Steenkamp has pleaded guilty to 336 charges of stealing the money. Medtronic is a subsidiary of a global medical devices company, a firm with hundreds of billions of rand in turnover. 537 million didn't raise an eyebrow until it did. Steven Powell is the director of forensics at ENSafrica, and this has got echoes of stories you were telling me more than a decade ago, Steven. The modus operandi here is alarmingly similar to many cases you yourself have prosecuted over the years.
That's correct, Bruce. Good evening, listeners. The volume of fraud in the marketplace at the moment has reached staggering proportions, and we are so busy. Every week there are cases, maybe not quite as much as this, but we've had quite a few cases. I think my record number is 10 billion rand that we've investigated with one of the financial institutions. But it is staggering that she was stealing at times almost 20 million a month and it wasn't noticed.
It seems impossible, doesn't it? But I mean, this is all of the elements of what she did here were all the classic hallmarks of a fraud. You've got a seemingly trustworthy person given huge responsibility, fiddling EFTs, electronic fund transfers, using multiple accounts. Invariably, there's usually a need. Either there's an addiction, in this case a gambling addiction, which is fairly common in these cases. Sometimes there's an illness that precipitates the first theft and somebody goes, well, I'm just borrowing the money. Then they get away with it and it becomes a habit, and then bad habits develop later. This is all the classic hallmarks of that classic kind of fraud.
Yeah, absolutely, Bruce. And what these fraudsters do is a bit of social engineering as well. They will gamble and they tell people that they gamble. So people assume when they see the fancy cars and they see the fancy house that this must be the proceeds of winning at the casinos. The reality is, on all of these cases that we investigate, and we've done quite a few of suspects who have had gambling addictions, they invariably end up losing a fortune, and they sometimes hope that they're going to be able to win big and plug the hole that they've left at the employer. So that is incredibly common. And my message to listeners out there is, when you see changes in an employee's lifestyle, be nervous, be very nervous, and check. It is possible to validate. And when you're making payments to suppliers, get the banks, pay a little extra to get the banks to validate the account name with that account number, because you might not be paying who you think you are.
And does this go down to something as simple as terrible internal controls, lousy auditing, and a failure of management oversight? Or are the people who are carrying out these things so devious that even some fairly standard controls would miss the obvious?
I think it's a combination of both. These individuals are incredibly clever and devious, and they exploit areas where it's difficult to pick up their activities. But I think with good controls, good oversight, and some basic checks, you need to be checking your vendor database regularly to make sure that you're only paying suppliers. And if you just run routine checks, you'll pick up if an employee is a beneficiary as well. And a lot of companies just don't do these types of checks. And the one factor that allows ladies like this Hildegard Steenkamp to get away with the fraud is a lack of segregation of duty. We put too much power in the hands of too few individuals, and particularly when they're processing EFT payments and they have access to your electronic bank account, they can get away with literally murder.
Here's the point, though, Stephen. I mean, this is not a how-to guide. If anybody thinks this is a how-to guide, it's not a how-to guide. This is because invariably these people are caught. These are people who usually, and you've told me this story before, these are people who are in trusted positions, who have a huge amount of excessive authority, and they usually are the person who doesn't take holiday. They're usually the churchgoer. They're usually the person who looks so squeaky clean you would never suspect them of committing a crime. They're the most helpful person in the entire business because they know where every single cent is, and they will guide you and assist you and help you to understand what is happening in your business better than anyone else. But the moment they take a holiday,
Absolutely.
or they get sick, or, I mean, I don't think they ever resign, because they do know that if they resign, the whole house of cards comes tumbling down, doesn't it? They do get caught eventually.
Yeah. They do get caught eventually. And Bruce, maybe I should just share with you, I've just done an investigation into the sweetest lady on our client's staff that you could ever meet. And she was trusted, popular, liked by everyone. And she has been stealing 70,000 Rand a month for the last 20 years. She's stolen a total of 13 million. And when we confronted her, she confessed literally in 5 minutes, and she was in tears. And when we asked her, what did you do with the money? Because there are no assets. She doesn't have any fancy vehicles, no fancy house. She said to me, Mr. Powell, I just love the vegetables. The fruit and veg at Woolies is so nice. But she was earning 15,000 a month and spending 70 a month, and literally shopping at supermarkets, retailers, twice, 3 times, 4 times a week, and fancy shoe stores, etc. And it's just crazy. No one suspected her over all of those years, and then suddenly the entity was bought by a new owner. The new owner performed a routine checking payments made to vendors against the employee payroll run, and suddenly they had a hit with this year-old lady and called us in, and the rest is history. And now the matter is going on to the criminal court roll for prosecution, and she's looking at a potential 15 years in jail.
I mean, for all of the salaciousness of these kinds of stories, Stephen, often there is a deep tragedy and a deep trauma in the background. There's always a reason why people start this thing, and they always think they can get ahead of it. They always think they can control it. Like any addiction, this becomes an addiction for them, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And, when I looked at this Steenkamp case, it looks like she started stealing within 6 months.
Yeah.
And my immediate assumption was that she's actually done this at a previous employer as well. People don't start these overnight. It's usually it's a temptation that's impossible to resist for these fraudsters.
Have you got a big business? I mean, Medtronic is an enormous global entity. They deal in very expensive medical equipment, and it's the ideal sort of place to hide yourself, isn't it? And I suppose that is the lesson to all of us, that you don't trust anyone.
Yep, absolutely. And that's the message. And I think that's my parting shot, Bruce. Don't rely purely on trust. Just make sure your controls are there and your segregation of duty is there as well.
Steven Powell, as always, thank you. Director of Forensics at ENSafrica this evening. On a repeat pattern, we see this happening time and time and time again. And I'm sorry if you are that lovely, trustworthy person sitting in the corner of the office who does work all hours that God sends, and you are honourable. But you're going to be looked at differently over the next week. And when your boss comes to you and says, we have to do a little investigation, don't take it personally. It's because of the people who appear to be like you, who are completely exploiting the goodwill of their employers, like the Hildegard Steenkamp, who is going to end up going to jail for a long time. And this other woman who stole 70,000 Rand a month over 20 years, 13 million Rand. Boy, she must be healthy. All those Woolies vegetables.
The Money Show with Bruce Whitfield
on CapeTalk.